Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. A new report from the Institute of Family Studies finds that more than half of young men in the U.S. feel lonely or isolated. 4 in 10 report feeling like failures. Doug Berry joins us with how we can rightly think about this issue and therefore how we can help. Doug is a devoted husband and father of 5 children, host of 2 popular series on EWTN television, Life on the Rock and Battle Ready. He's also the author of First Line of Defense, The Catholic Man's Call to Heroism. And he's currently a co-host of the podcast U.S. Grace Force. For over 30 years, he's traveled both nationally and internationally to speak about and defend the Catholic faith and virtuous manhood. Doug, it's great to speak with you again. How are you?
Good, Dr. Marcus. Good to have the opportunity to be with you again.
Well, I greatly enjoyed our exchange the last time, and I'm very glad to reconnect with you this time. 4 in 10, more than 4 in 10 young men that were surveyed state I'm inclined to think that I am a failure, and report feeling lonely or isolated. In some ways, this isn't surprising, but it certainly is jarring.
It is, and it's also very concerning because, we're talking about an age group, it was 18 to 29 that they looked at, about 2,000 guys. And these are our future fathers, husbands, business owners, our workers of the world, of society. And that interior side that's hurting in that way, to feel like a failure, we both know, and many of your audience know, this is one of the greatest attacks of the enemy. The devil tries to tear us down and discourage us and make us feel like we are failures, like we do not have a place, like we are not loved. And so many of the pieces of that study point that out. They feel the lack of friendship, the lack of community, the lack of being loved in many cases. So that idea of feeling like a failure is a first step towards really, you could say, neutering a man in the sense of, where's the potential, where's the passion, where's the talent? Most importantly, what is God calling these men, calling any of us to do and to be, and how that interior disposition of discouragement can really undermine any of the efforts that we are called to take to try to find, the path that God wants us to take in this world.
The question here, Doug, is also, what does it mean to be a man? I believe for so many of these young men, the cultural structure that used to help us decide from a social perspective, let alone a biblical perspective, of what manhood and womanhood meant is gone. And we can't presume that culture will help our sons discover that.
I could not agree more. We are seeing so many changes, have seen so many changes in the last several decades of our societies in various ways that have really torn apart these structures. We talk about this in the book that Daniel O'Connor and I wrote, First Line of Defense. In the very beginning, the first chapter, the quality of courage, is that there was something that was in men years ago. And one of the examples we use in the book is 1941, December 7th, when Pearl Harbor happened. The next day, December 8th, recruiting stations across the country had men coming out the doors, down the sidewalks, into the streets. These were men who recognized a need. They understood their structure, that society needed good men to stand tall against an attack. And whenever you have a threat against an innocent or a value that is good, holy, and true, men need to step up and engage and get in that gap. And you saw this years ago. It used to be in the blood of most men. Not all. There's always been, the Judas in the crowd, so to speak. But most men had that. And it was a structure that men passed on. Fathers would look at their sons and say, this is what you do. You roll up your sleeves and you get in there. You be a disciplined man, you be a good man, and you get the job done. If you're pinned down on a beach taking gunfire, for example, you figure out a way to get off that beach. You have to figure these things out and move forward. And you're absolutely right. The structure is so torn apart now. And that's one of the reasons for the book, is we wanted to help men and women to understand men, but help men understand this call to heroism is really, it's intricate in all of us men. We're really designed for it. In the beginning of the book, I wrote a letter in there to my sons, and it could be written from fathers to sons across the world, about when I was a young man, I dreamed of slaying dragons and saving worlds. And I've counted my battles over the years. And now that I'm an older man, and the idea is when we get much, much older, we may be older, but interiorly we still have that. It's still in there. It's supposed to be, but as you've said, the structure is so torn apart. It doesn't surprise me that these men in this study are feeling the way they are. But there is hope, and we can do something about it. But we've got to work from different angles on it, because there isn't just one problem here, there, and there's not just one solution.
You know, that language from Henry V, Shakespeare, once more into the breach, dear friends, once more. There's not a single boy on the planet that doesn't want to hear those words from his father. He wants to be exhorted to battle, but he also wants to be taught how to fight, what the fight looks like, and how am I supposed to respond in this fight. And so it's incumbent upon you and I, and your book really talks about this, it's incumbent upon you and I to call out the warrior in our sons.
Yeah, 100%. And this is something that we have seen, this emasculation that has taken place, this feminization that has happened to men in many respects. You know, as St. Thomas Aquinas talks about, you know, taking the easier path rather than the more arduous, more difficult, challenging one. That doesn't mean you don't work smarter, not harder. Of course, it's good to work smarter, not harder, but there still must be that interior and that exterior that says, I need to be physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually prepared for the difficult challenges. And you're right, fathers, traditionally, that was where you saw this being passed on. And we've lost a lot of that. Men today, their sons are trying to stand on their shoulders, you know, so to speak, and many men just don't know necessarily what to do to help them with that. I see this in Catholic men in traveling around the country, speaking at conferences or men's events or even family events everywhere for years, where you see that look in men's eyes, and even when they'll come up and talk to you about it, they will scratch their head basically saying, I'm not sure what to do to help my sons, to call them up to that battle in whatever way they're called to engage in it. And so there does need to be this formation, this training, which is, you know, obviously the famous scripture verse where iron sharpens iron as one man sharpens another. We do need to be, as men, that sharpening tool to help in a good way, positive way, but with a challenge, raise each other up to be the men that God calls us to be, spiritually and naturally.
And to go back to that study, it's actually reported that they still have these honorable aspirations to be responsible men, to marry, to have children, to contribute to society. So in essence, Doug, we have a society that's trying to kill that from exteriorly to within their hearts.
Yeah, I think you find that also. You could make that comparison to women, where a lot of young ladies today have bought into the feminism that's out there, but interiorly they do still have that maternal instinct. There's something inside that wants to bring life into the world, wants to be a nurturer, a mother, a wife, to care for the hearts and the minds and souls of others. As a woman, and even though feminism has really torn that apart, but you're right, when it comes to men, they're still in there. I can see this when I'm giving presentations and talks, and I'm looking at the faces of these guys, young and old alike, and you can see when you talk a certain way, they sit up differently. The look in their face changes. They almost hold their shoulders back a bit more and their chest out just a bit more, because there is something in them, as you've said. We want to be exhorted, called up to engage in a purposeful battle for what is good and holy and true. And that study, you're right, when reading through that and seeing that these guys still have that in them, because it's intricate. It's built in from God. And God does call men to be protectors, defenders, providers, to be heads of families and of society, to be priests, heads of parishes and churches, and to do it in a very strong, godly, holy, masculine way. And so it's there. And you're right, the enemy knows if I just undermine that and discourage that, and then the men don't act upon those things with a sense of discipline and good ethics to create and nurture and develop naturally and spiritually those pieces, then we kind of sit and wallow in this trouble. One of the numbers, the statistics that they pointed out was, I think it was 42% of these men use pornography daily or several times a day. That's another area that is a key place that is destroying and undermining us.
Yep. I'm talking with Doug Barry. Doug is a Catholic speaker, television host, author, and we're talking about this new study from the Institute of Family Studies that has proven that many young men today feel lonely, disconnected, and also identify as failures. We're going to continue on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Pete. I'm talking with Doug Barry, husband and father of 5, host of multiple popular series on EWTN TV and EWTN podcasts, currently the co-host of the podcast U.S. Grace Force. For over 30 years, he's been a Catholic speaker, nationally and internationally, about the Catholic faith and virtuous manhood. Doug, one of the things you brought up earlier that I want to invite you to speak boldly into as well is that in my own speaking, especially to young men in men's conferences, I've lost count how many young men have come up to me and said the dating scene is not like it once was. And feminism has worked a number even on Catholic women's imaginations. And so the way they think about men and dating and the expectations they have of men has become rather, for want of a better expression, anywhere from unrealistic to maybe a little corrupted. I invite you to speak to that.
Yeah, and that's I guess one of the points I was thinking about when I said earlier that there are multiple reasons why this is happening to the men, and there are multiple solutions or ways to address this. And part of this is the side of the woman. Women today, you're right, the feminization has been very destructive. Clearly, this has been an attack from the enemy, but many people have willingly cooperated with this. And the empowerment of women and the destruction of men. And there's a report that's even on the news I saw earlier today of so many stay-at-home husbands and boyfriends. So you've got live-in relationships, of course, cohabitation. Boyfriends are staying home. The women are the primary breadwinner. That seems to be growing in some areas. So these types of things that feminism has done has really, again, undermined and attacked the structure. There are so many men, I bump into the same type of men who come up and say, I really want to find a good, holy, godly woman, but it's so hard to find that. Men are built to win the hearts of women, and women are built to have hearts that are winnable. I say to ladies all the time, have a winnable heart. Help the men, not just waiting around for them to burst through the door, kick through the wall, and save you from something, but show them that your heart is a heart worth winning, that you want to be that godly woman, that strong woman, that truly Marian type of woman that has an interior strength, not this outwardly bold sort of appearance that can really be misleading and not conducive to really God's design. But there's something about the interior beauty and strength of the Blessed Mother that women can wonderfully model and show the relentless pursuit of faith and strength, clinging to Jesus, and be that type of woman. Then you're going to win the men that you really want to win. And men are truly seeking, the good, holy, godly men that are trying, that's the type of woman that they want. And this is something I have 4 sons, and I have 2 that are married and 2 that aren't. And I hear this from the 2 that aren't, is the struggle with today's feminine disposition, if you will, regarding marriage and such, is brutal. And it's a sad situation that we're in, but it's, again, something that can be corrected. And I know we can talk about that, but parents have to be involved. The church has to be involved from different areas and different perspectives. We have to attack this and address this.
And there's a categorically objective reality that the Marxist paradigm in society has pushed forth, which is the feminization of men and the masculinization of women. And some people might say, and I disagree with the framing, but it's objectively true that is the effort, that was the push for the sake of flattening the differences between men and women. And that's had horrendous ramifications on society and marriage and the family.
It has. And they're not even hiding that anymore. That hasn't been hidden for quite a while. They came out with that, the destruction of the not just the roles, but the godly design. I mean, so much about the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia and such that our Blessed Mother warned us about in Fatima was very clearly to undermine all of these areas that God has created society to flourish through and with. And that flattening, as you said, is an excellent way of putting it, because it does level the playing field, so to speak, and then everybody's just the same, and really we're not. There's just no way that that's ever going to be true. Now we've come to the point where you can declare that you are the opposite sex by just stating it, and that's the way you feel, and legally that has to be accepted. This has really gotten to a point that is off the charts. I mean, you and I are old enough to know when we were younger, if this sort of thing would have been discussed, that we would hear this pronoun issue and transgender issue being so widely accepted, fought for, defended, people getting fired if they don't accept it. we would just thought, that's crazy. It's not going to get that bad. And here we sit. There's one way out of this ultimately, and that is we have got to do what Our Lady of Fatima said, and that is turn back to her son. She says, if you do what I ask, you can alleviate these things. You can drive communism out. And we're seeing that even with, you're up in Michigan, I believe, right, Doctor? And you just had an election.
Yeah.
And we have this guy elected now who, is a DSA agent type, and we're seeing this across the country. And Our Lady has given us the remedy. And that's for all of these areas, from the manhood problem, the womanhood problem, the communism problem, and that is to turn back to her son, deepen our prayer. But then there's natural components too. We talk about that in the book, and I know you and I discussed it in the previous interview.
Thereby, Doug, one of the issues that you have driven yourself into in terms of your postulate, but also that you exhort in the book, Catholics have an obligation to, like you said, immerse ourselves in all of these spiritual heritages, but then to not keep it to ourselves. In many ways, we lost the culture battle because we ceded the culture grounds to other people, thinking the government, the society, maybe the culture, maybe the public schools, like they will keep holding the status quo. They didn't. We let this happen.
We did. And another analogy of that, or another way of looking at that, is men have relinquished their first and foremost priority to protect and defend their families to simply calling 911. That's kind of an example of what you're saying. Someone else will take care of it. I don't have to be in shape. I don't have to have an idea how to fight, protect, defend. I don't have to keep my guard up so much. I just got to call 911, and someone will come to save me and save those under my care. And so it's another area where we have just kind of turned it over to others. And I remember the words of Pope John Paul I, who stated in his very short, I think, 33-day papacy, you only preserve the truth that you defend. And that's all these pieces as well: true manhood, true womanhood, true relationships. And it does need to be something we must, again, as you mentioned, immerse ourselves in our faith, know the teachings, understand the history of things so that we don't repeat it in the negative, destructive ways. And then we have got to engage. And the natural component of being disciplined, of being active in our communities, in the public square, as Popes John Paul II, Pope Benedict, for example, have told us, we need to get out there and do this. Now, in the article they mentioned, the Pope Leo even said something about a digital sobriety, I think was the term. We need to be teaching and preaching that as well. We've got to pull back from this excessive use of screens, social media, news, and really get back to just adoration, prayer, sacraments. Be aware of that stuff, sure. You do, I do, we follow it, we pay attention, but I don't let it consume me. And that's what's happening in the study with a lot of these men, is they have allowed themselves to be so consumed by video game. Over 40% play video games every day. And again, the pornography problem and just the social media. And I think, Doctor, one of the big problems with social media is we fall into unhealthy comparison. And that may be where some of these guys are at, too. They're comparing their lives and their idea of the American dream and family and relationships with what they see in social media. And as the saying goes, the grass is always greener on the other side of the Instagram screen. And that's just a very unhealthy way to live life and to gauge your existence and your purpose in this world.
And almost 100% of the time, that green grass is just a filter. It's completely fake.
You're right. You're really, it's true.
But you bring up this video game thing, Doug. You and I touched on this very briefly in the last conversation. The reason why game developers are creating games the way they are now is because it speaks to that male need for conquering and for achieving, and it satiates that need temporarily but artificially. And so you wind up creating this counterfeit of a man who mentally believes I've achieved something, but really in reality he's achieved nothing, and he withers away into that nothing.
Yeah, that's so true. Increasing in your level of your video game, level up or what? I mean, where is that in the big picture of being able to lay my head on the pillow at night, feeling like I've really accomplished something as a man, for the way God designed me to? The dragons that we are supposed to slay oftentimes start within ourselves. Concupiscence and the battles of the 7 deadly sins and the attacks that we get from the world, the flesh, and the devil. But then there are those battles outside, whether it's the political world or the educational world. We've got to bring God's truth and light into all these different realms. Those are the battles. Those are the areas where we want to level up, so to speak. But the video game thing, it's a game. And just like sports and some of these things, they will all pass. And they are all there so temporarily, and they're relatively shallow in many respects. And we can all get caught up in that stuff, but we have to be dedicated and committed to a prayer life. And men, I would say to any man listening out there, and to the ladies who might be listening, to encourage the men when it comes to dealing with this issue, like we've seen in this article, in this survey. We have got to be on our knees. We've got to be in those moments daily where I'm simply turning to God and saying, I need your guidance, I need your wisdom, I need your counsel, I need your direction, Lord. And then roll up your sleeves and fulfill your duties and your responsibilities. Develop your physical, personal, emotional, mental habits in good ways, godly ways. I just recently had a conversation with one of my sons, and I said, you have a lot of charisma and a lot of charm that God has given you to use in this world, but remember, your character, your interior character before God is always far more important than all the other external things that you have. When that character is in the right place, it will drive all these other pieces, and it will be driven in good ways. We've got to encourage that among men. But we older guys have got to encourage the younger guys. Roll up your sleeves, toughen up for the fight, turn to God, and let's do this together.
Doug, I could go on with you, and I want to say thank you very much for making the time to talk with us. I've been talking with Doug Barry. Now, Doug wears many hats. He's a Catholic speaker, TV host, podcast host, and most of all, I want to highlight this book of his, First Line of Defense, The Catholic Man's Call to Heroism. It was a very easy read, very practical, applicable reality. We've been talking about the fact that the vast majority of surveyed men are showing today that they feel isolated and feel like failures. There's a remedy. It's Christ and natural law. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.